And good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Bible study, our first one now for 2022. Can you imagine it? January 2022. It is the third day of January, Monday. Welcome. I'm Mike Carey, pastor of the First United Methodist Church of Nevada, Iowa, and it is 2 o'clock on a sunny afternoon, but it's cold out there. And so this is our first time getting together in the new year. And I also bring you greetings from the frozen tundra up from Sven and Ole up north on the frozen tundra. And they are curious to know if any of you made any New Year's resolutions. Of course, Ole, his New Year's, seems like every year he makes a New Year's resolution to lose weight. In fact, the thing was, he thought actually he was losing weight, he said, but it was just the tie strap on his sweatpants came undone. So he, too bad, tough luck, but not happening. But anyway, welcome. And we are continuing our going through the Gospel of Luke. We are up to chapter 6, verses 39 through 46. Now, this is Luke's version of what Matthew covers in Matthew 5, 6, and 7, the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount. This is Luke's version. And it takes a little bit of a different format, and we've already got started on it, and so we'll just jump right in here, okay? Jesus spoke a parable to them. Surely a blind man cannot lead a blind man. If he tries to do so, they will both fall into the ditch. The disciple cannot advance beyond his teacher, but every disciple will be equipped as his teacher is. Why do you look at the speck of dust that is in your brother's eye, and you do not notice the plank, the board that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take out the speck of dust that is in your eye, when you yourself do not notice the plank, the board in your own eye? You hypocrite! First, put the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to put out the speck of dust that is in your brother's eye. There is no good tree which produces rotten fruit, nor again is there a rotten tree that produces good fruit. Each tree is recognized by its own fruit. People do not gather figs from thistles, nor do they gather grapes from a bramble bush. The good man produces good from the treasure of his heart. The evil man produces evil from the evil. The mouth speaks out of whatever abounds in the heart. Interesting. You can see and feel the similarities between what we see in Matthew's gospel, but you can also see that there's a definite difference, a different tenor to the way Luke puts this across. So, one thing about the Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes and the whole thing, the question is brought up, and I think maybe I addressed this last time too, was this a particular setting where Jesus spoke all of these things at the same time, or is this a collection of Jesus's teachings, certain particular points that he would hit on again and again that were poignant to him, important to him? We're not sure. It could be that this is an example of the Jewish form of preaching, which is called charaz. And for the Jewish rabbi in those days, the idea was you did not dwell on one particular subject too long. Instead, and the reason being is that they thought that people would lose interest. And so they would move from one subject to the next, to the next, to the next. They thought that would generate more interest amongst people. And that could be what we have here. It could be Jesus is actually preaching a message here within the Jewish tradition, and he's moving from one subject to the next. It could, though, also be that this is an example of the primary points that Jesus taught on. And most teachers, especially an itinerant preacher like this, who travels from one place to the next, is going to have certain key themes that they're going to keep repeating over and over again because they Well, they consider them to be especially important. This is the idea that the preacher, the teacher, is trying to get across to folks. And so, what we have here, this particular passage now, verses 39 to 46, falls into four basic sections. Verses 39 and 40, Jesus is warning that no teacher can lead his disciples, his scholars, be it what they may, beyond where they themselves are. In other words, you can't preach what you don't know. You can't teach what you don't know, what you have not experienced for it. The double warning here is that, number one, when you're selecting a teacher and someone that you want to follow their example and their teachings, don't just settle for any Tom, Dick, or Harry or Jane. Find someone who is going to challenge you, who is going to push you. Too often we settle for what's comfortable. And Christianity is not about what is comfortable. It's about getting pushed, being stretched. And so when you're choosing a teacher, find someone who will challenge you, someone who will stretch you. Also, this is talking to us here about a teacher. We need to remember, you can't teach what you do not know. I remember, oh goodness, 10 years ago, maybe something like that, I was asked to be a teacher at the United Methodist Women's School of Mission, which is held over in Marshalltown at the community college there, and they meet twice a year. And I said, sure, basically because it was a friend that was asking me, and I had a hard time saying no to her. But I thought, okay, as a pastor, I'm going to be asked to teach, something out of the Bible, something biblical or spiritual, and I would have no trouble doing that. No, my area of instruction and expertise was to be globalism. In other words, talking about the world economy as it's developing and becoming a global economy and the impacts of that upon the poor and other people. And when I was told that, my response was, what? I don't know anything about economics or world trade or anything like that. I mean, this is totally out of my wheelhouse. Well, there was to be a training session for everyone that was going to be part. This was a jurisdictional wide thing, the entire north central jurisdiction. And they had a training session for 3 or 4 days over in Indiana. But we were supposed to be prepared before we got there. And so I had to do a real deep dive into the subject matter. I had a couple of months to work on it. And while I learned a lot, for example, the most widely traded commodity in the world is petroleum, oil. What's number 2? I didn't know. I found out it was coffee. Wow. Coffee is the number 2 world item that is exchanged globally in terms of trade. So I learned a lot about that. But it was an extreme challenge to me because I'm supposed to teach people about something I know absolutely nothing about. That was tough. That was a challenge. But it also showed that you can indeed teach an old dog new tricks. If somebody tells you you can't do that, you tell them wrong, because this old dog did learn. Actually, I had no choice because I had already said yes, and there was no way this particular friend was going to let me back out of anything. So it was a learning experience, not only for me, because I had to learn before I could teach anybody else. So while it's a warning to us teachers that don't try to teach what you don't know, there's no shame in saying, I don't know the answer to that question, but you can always say there's no shame in saying, but I will go find out and I'll come back to you when I have an answer, and I will find an answer. You can always learn, but don't try to fake it. I used to be back in my younger days, I somebody asked me a question that was a difficult question, and I was quick enough on my intellectual feet that I could dazzle them with my intellectual footwork, and I could kind of work my way around it. Well, I can't do that any longer, and also I believe that that's not an honest thing to do. It's okay to say, I don't know, but I'll find out. So, and that's important because teaching is extremely important, not just for those of us who aspire to the role and position of a teacher, like a pastor, but also for all of us who are, or teachers, even though we don't realize it, we are role models. Former basketball player, Hall of Famer Charles Barkley, did a commercial one time in which he said, I am not a role model. Well, yes, you are. All of us are. You never know who's watching. And we are role models. We are teaching by what we are doing. In fact, that comes on into a little bit later here in this particular set of teachings, where Jesus is talking about a rotten tree doesn't produce good fruit and vice versa. You know someone by their works, by what they say, in those unguarded moments. You know, most of us can be pretty decent in what we say if we stop and think about it before we do, but sometimes we're unguarded. We don't stop before we think, and that tells you a lot about a person in terms of where is their heart, what is in their heart. And so that's verses 39 through 40. Kind of got a little far afield there, but verses 41 and 42, this is an example of Jesus's idea of humor. And when you stop and think about it, it is funny. The idea of trying to pull a speck of sawdust out of somebody else's eye, and you got a 2x4 sticking out of your own eye. That's exaggerated speech. It's hyperbole, because, you know, how in the world is somebody going to be able to function in any way, shape, or form with a log in their eye? Well, you can't, but it's like one of those satirical, political, exaggerated cartoons that you see. And Jesus is using hyperbole here, but he's pointing out the sheer hypocrisy of it all. You cannot, and actually, you know, to try and pull the speck out of somebody else's eye is judgmental. Now, you may think, well, I'm just trying to help somebody. Well, if you're going to try and tell somebody else how to live their life, your life better be perfect. And whose life is perfect? That one of the things they teach us in counseling is not trying to tell someone else what to do or how to live your life. It is exploring the situation and the circumstances that the person finds himself in and trying to help them find their own answers. Because if it's not the answer of the person seeking help, if it's my answer, it's not really going to do the person any good. It's got to be their answer. They've got to come to terms with the situation and the question. And so a good counselor is someone who leads people into thinking, considering, honestly looking at, you know, drawing conclusions maybe and posing them to people as a question. Do you think this course of action is good? Do you think this is right? Do you think this is something you should be pursuing? And you deal with the situation that way. But Jesus is talking here now about you can't be judgmental. You can't be telling other people how to live their lives, because your life better be totally and perfectly in order. So don't worry about the speck in my eye. Get the log out of your own eye. And that probably, talking about lumber and sawdust and stuff as a carpenter, that probably made sense to him. But and you could probably see the people that are standing around there hearing this for the first time, and maybe they smiled, maybe they chuckled, you know, maybe they just downright laughed at the sheer buffoonery of the imagery. And a lot of times, that's what it takes to get people to seriously consider an issue. You've got to really exaggerate the picture for them to begin to see it and understand, okay, where do I fit in to this whole thing, this whole issue? So now verses 43 and 44 here remind us that a person cannot be judged in any other way than by their deeds. This is what I was referring to a few minutes ago, talking about rotten tree cannot produce good fruit. What is in your heart is what's going to come out of your mouth. I mean, you can fool some of the people some of the time, as P.T. Barnum once said, but you can't fool all the people all of the time. If you can, if you've figured out how to do that, you probably should be writing books. And you're not going to be paying a whole lot of attention to what this country preacher is talking about here. So people will know you by your actions, by the fruit of your life. And if you're a rotten, lousy person, that's basically what's going to come out of your life. Good stuff does not come out of bad people. Now, can God turn bad stuff into good things? Yeah, he can, but we're talking here about judging a person and their life in terms of what kind of a person are they. And so that's what Jesus is talking about there. Now, let's just go one more section here, shall we? Verses 47 through 49. That'll take us to the end of the chapter, by the way, chapter 6. Jesus said, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not what I say?" In other words, you don't do what I say. "I will show you what everyone who comes to me and listens to my words and does is like. He is like a man building a house, who dug deep down into the earth and laid the foundation on a rock. When the flood rose and the river dashed against that house, it would not shake it, because it is well founded. But he who has listened to me and has not done what I say is like a man who built a house on top of earth without any foundation. The river dashed against it, and immediately it collapsed, and great was the fall of it." Now, you need to read the companion passage over in Matthew chapter 7, where Jesus also gives his teaching. And you also have to understand the imagery there, and you also have to understand what Palestine is like. Palestine is very dry for a better part of the year, and there are entire rivers that dry up in Palestine, and they leave just a sandy river bottom. And what Luke is talking about here is somebody comes along, they're looking for some place to build a house, and they see this nice stretch of sand. Well, it's easy to build on sand. You just level it out and don't put any footings down or lay much of a foundation. You can just build right there. But the problem is, when the dry season ends and the autumn rains come in September, and all of a sudden those riverbeds that were totally dry become raging torrents. And you know what a flood can do. And if you have no foundation whatsoever, well, your house is going to be washed away. Jesus says, better that you build on a rock. Now, why wouldn't somebody build on a rock? Well, building on a rock is hard. To cut stone, to lay the foundation, to do it right, to level everything out on stone is hard work. But it's worth it, because when you take the long view, Jesus said when the floods come, it's not going to hurt that house because it's built on a rock. It's got a solid foundation. The person who builds on sand is looking for the easy way. They're not willing to work. They're not willing to put in the effort that needs to be done in order to build a solid foundation, a solid house that's going to last when the trials of life come. And that's what we're talking about here. When you're building the foundation of your life, when you're putting down the footings, the foundation, what are you building it on? Are you building it on sound life principles of love, peace, joy, commitment to serving other people, loving other people, embracing diversity in other people? Those are the kinds of things that are going to last. They would also seem to be common sense to many of us, but other people, they don't care. They're lazy, short-sighted. maybe think it doesn't matter, and they're just going to build on whatever they want or on nothing at all. Well, the old story goes, those who aim at nothing usually hit it. What are you aiming at? What are you building your life on? What are the foundations that are important to you, that you base your life on? And that's what Jesus is talking about here. He's talking about the need to be a loving, caring, committed person who loves their neighbor, who loves God, who is taking the long view, which is kind of hard in today's society because a lot of people don't take the long view anymore. They want instant gratification, instant satisfaction. Proof of that is how the fast food industry has flourished. We want it, and we want it right now. We don't want to wait for things. We are just a very short-sighted, lacking in patience society. So that is the end of chapter 6 of Luke's Gospel, and we'll pick things up then in chapter 7 on Wednesday, and we'll talk about how Jesus goes on in his ministry to Capernaum, and we'll see what happens there when we pick it up next time on Wednesday at 2 o'clock. So in the meantime, as I said, Mike Carey, First United Methodist Church, Nevada, Iowa, and I'm hoping that the Lord blesses you real good and that you have a great new year. Happy New Year.